fastened back in some extraordinary way. What groans! What rags! What a chorus of whining! This concourse is probably owing to our having sent them some money yesterday. I try to take no notice, and write on as if I were deaf. I must walk out of the room without looking behind me, and send the porter to disperse them. There are no bell ropes in these parts. I come back again to write, hardly recovered from the start that I have just got. I had hardly written the last words when I heard a footstep near me, and looking up, lo, there was my friend with the foot standing within a yard of me, his hand stretched out for alms. I was so frightened that for a moment I thought of giving him my watch to get rid of him. However, I glided past him with a few unintelligible words, and rushed to call the servant, sending him some money by the first person who came. The porter, who had not seen him pass, is now dispersing the crowd. What vociferous exclamations! A has come in and drawn the curtains, and I think they are going off. Yesterday evening I was taken to visit the president. The palace is an immense building, containing, besides the apartments of the president and his Ministers, all the chief courts of justice. It occupies one side of the square, but is no way remarkable in its architecture. At the end of every flight of steps that we mounted we came upon lounging soldiers in their yellow cloaks, and women in reboso standing about. We passed through a hall filled with soldiers into the antechamber, where we were received by several aides de camp, who conducted us into a very well furnished room, where we sat a few minutes till an officer came to lead us into the reception room, which is a handsome apartment, about 100 feet long, and fitted up with crimson and gold, also well lighted. General Bustamante, now in plain clothes, gave us a very cordial reception. He looks like a good man, with an honest, benevolent face, frank and simple in his manners, and not at all like a hero. His conversation was not brilliant, indeed I do not know apropos to what, I suppose to the climate, but it chiefly turned on medicine. There cannot be a greater contrast, both in appearances and reality, than between him and Santa Anna. There is no lurking devil in his eyes. All is frank, open, and unreserved. It is impossible to look in his face without believing him to be an honest and well-intentioned man. An unprincipled but clever writer has said of him, that he has no great capacity or superior genius, but that, whether from reflection or from slowness of comprehension, he is always extremely calm in his determinations. That, before entering into any project, he inquires and considers deeply as to whether it be just or not, but that once convinced that it is or appears to be so, he sustains his ground with firmness and constancy. He adds that it suits him better to obey than to command, for which reason he was always so devoted a servant of the Spaniards and of Iturbide. He is said to be a devoted friend, is honest to a proverb, and personally brave, though occasionally deficient in moral energy. He is therefore an estimable man, and one who will do his duty to the best of his ability, though whether he has severity and energy sufficient for those evil days in which it is his lot to govern, may be problematical. Having made a sufficiently long visit to his Excellency, we went to return that of the Countess C., who has a magnificent house, with suites of large rooms, of which the drawing room is particularly handsome, of immense size, the walls beautifully painted, the subjects religious, and where I found one of Broadwood's finest grand pianos. But although there are cabinets inlaid with gold, fine paintings, and hundreds of rich and curious things, our European eyes are struck with numerous inconsistencies in dress, servants, etc., in all of which there is a want of keeping very remarkable. Yet this house, and the one adjoining, which also belongs to the family, are palaces in vastness, and the Countess receives me more as if I were her daughter, than a person with whom she has been acquainted but a few days. There are an extraordinary number of street cries in Mexico, which begin at dawn and continue till night, performed by hundreds of discordant voices, impossible to understand at first. but Señor has been giving me an explanation of them until I begin to have some distant idea of their meaning. At dawn you are awakened by the shrill and desponding cry of the carbonero, the coalman. "Carbón, Señor," which, as he pronounces it, sounds like "carbosú." Then the greaseman takes up the song, "Mantequilla," lard, lard, at 1 real and a half. "Salt beef, good salt beef." "Cecina, buena," interrupts the butcher in a hoarse voice. "Hay cebo." This is the prolonged and melancholy note of the woman who buys kitchen stuff, and stops before the door. Then passes by the cambista, a sort of Indian sheet trader or exchanger, who sings out, "Tejocotes por venas de chile," a small fruit which she proposes exchanging for hot peppers. No harm in that. A kind of ambulating pedlar drowns the shrill treble of the Indian cry. He calls aloud upon the public to buy needles, pins, thimbles, shirt buttons, tape, cotton balls, small mirrors, etc. He enters the house and is quickly surrounded by the women, young and old, offering him the tenth part of what he asks, and which, after much haggling, he accepts. Behind him stands the Indian with his tempting baskets of fruit, of which he calls out all the names, till the cook or housekeeper can resist no longer, and putting her head over the balustrade, calls him up with his bananas and oranges and granaditas, etc. A sharp note of interrogation is heard, indicating something that is hot, and must be snapped up quickly before it cools. "Gorditas de horna caliente." Little fat cakes from the oven, hot? This is in a female key, sharp and shrill. Follows the mat seller. "Who wants mats from Puebla? Mats of 5 yards." These are the most matinal cries. At midday the beggars begin to be particularly importunate, and their cries and prayers and long recitations form a running accompaniment to the other noises. Then above all rises the cry of "Honey cakes! Cheese and honey! Requesón and good honey!" Requesón being a sort of hard curd sold in cheeses. Then come the dulce men, the sellers of sweetmeats, of merengues which are very good, and of all sorts of candy. "Caramelos de esperma! Bocadillo de coco!" Then the lottery men, the messengers of fortune, with their shouts of "The last ticket yet unsold, for half a real!" A tempting announcement to the lazy beggar, who finds it easier to gamble than to work, and who may have that sum hid about his rags. Towards evening rises the cry of "Tortillas de cuajada!" "Curd cakes!" or "Do you take nuts?" succeeded by the night cry of "Chestnuts hot and roasted!" and by the affectionate vendors of ducks, "Ducks, oh my soul, hot ducks! Maize cakes!" etc., etc. As the night wears away, the voices die off, to resume next morning in fresh vigour. Tortillas, which are the common food of the people, and which are merely maize cakes mixed with a little lime, and of the form and size of what we call scones, I find rather good when very hot and fresh baked, but insipid by themselves. They have been in use all through this country since the earliest ages of its history, without any change in the manner of baking them, excepting that, for the noble Mexicans, in former days, they used to be kneaded with various medicinal plants, supposed to render them more wholesome. They are considered particularly palatable with chile, to endure which, in the quantities in which it is eaten here, it seems to me necessary to have a throat lined with tin. In unpacking some books today, I happened to take up "Sartor Resartus," which, by a curious coincidence, opened of itself, to my great delight, at the following passage: "The simplest costume," observes our professor, "which I anywhere find alluded to in history, is that used as regimental by Bolivar's cavalry in the late Columbian wars. A square blanket, 12 feet in diagonal, is provided. Some were wont to cut off the corners and make it circular. In the centre a slit is effected, 18 inches long; through this the mother naked trooper introduces his head and neck, and so rides, shielded from all weather, and in battle from many strokes, for he rolls it about his left arm. and not only dressed,